Have you ever considered why we have a drive-up window at a fast food restaurant but not at the produce aisle of the grocery store? Have you ever considered why we salivate over a bacon double cheeseburger but sort of roll our eyes at a black bean burger? Have you ever considered why we reach for a protein bar full of all kinds of ingredients that most of us find hard to understand and that could never be sustainable over a handful of trail mix? Good morning, I'm Jonathan Netsky. I'm the founder of Local Alternative Foods, and it is my honor to be here today. We're the makers of the 100% whole food, plant-based protein and sauce lines under the Next Veg brand for the food service industry. And I gotta tell you, before I was in the industry, before I had learned how food gets to market, before I had learned and taught about sustainable food systems, I had so much anxiety over food. I almost had a paralysis to know what to eat. I was completely confounded. Was eating this food going to make me thinner or thicker? Would it make me vitally stronger, earlier to the grave? Would it kill butterflies in Peru or perhaps free indentured slaves on an island somewhere? I don't know if you've ever considered these kinds of things, but I truly have thought about them so much over the last 20 years that I've boiled it down into a single question. What can I afford to eat that comforts me, fights disease, and heals the planet? It's a big question, right? So, what do we all want from our food? Well, the truth is that if our food is affordable, it's accessible to us. That's critical. And if it's delicious, we'll come back for it again. And if it's easy to understand, it makes that initial purchase so much more simple. And we can't forget nutrition because we innately know that when we see ingredients we love that make us feel strong and vibrant, we gravitate to them. But these are subjective. These are our preferences, and we all share these preferences to some degree, but they're gauged, again, on our personal choice. Whereas today, we're all seeking sustainable food, and sustainability is quantitative. Sustainability can be calculated, and it's becoming more and more real to do the math to learn whether our food is truly sustainable or not. So in a room full of some of the most incredible food innovators in the world, whether you're a restaurant owner or a food manufacturer or a chef, what if we could future-proof the value of your plant-based menu? You know, in order to think about that, we have to start from history. So we began with the reality that some incredible, smart, and perhaps very wealthy people figured out how to monetize the grasslands of the Great Plains of the United States to turn it into an incredible cattle industry that provides beef as well as provides dairy. And to such a degree that we've created these incredible foods like the cheeseburger. You know, and the cheeseburger we've created because of its incredible environmental value. Well, no, the cheeseburger, we all know, it doesn't have environmental strength, but it is a cash machine. And to the degree that we make about 50 billion hamburgers a year just in the United States, that means that every 2 seconds we process an entire large animal. And I don't just mean a large cattle for beef, I mean a full-grown steer. 1, 2, the entire animal would be processed. Absolutely incredible that we've figured out how to do that. And we did put a lot of American dollars, a lot of tax, a lot of subsidies into learning this over the years. And in doing so, we've fostered a system that we know, and we've known for decades, isn't particularly sustainable, nor is it providing truly healthy food. When at the same time, as you can see, there's lots of options that we've known about that sit right in front of us that perhaps do meet that profile. So I'm not here today believing that anybody is going to remove meat and dairy from their menus instantaneously, but I am here today to empower us and encourage us and share knowledge on how we can make food from plants differently. In order to do so, we can't just throw away the system. We have to focus on the realities of the system, and that is that maximum profit will still rule. But if we look at this equation and we say, well, maximum profit has to equal the impact of eating our food combined with the satisfaction we get from the food to choose to buy it again and again. So a simple equation, utilizing math to define our reality going forward in our food system, because if we can truly align the profitability and the longevity of our food system, of our profit, with the well-being of the animals, the people, and the planet, we will have solved for the most disruptive opportunity present in our food system today. So what do we know? Where do we start? Well, we know that if you make something out of plants, you're very likely to have a lower footprint, to be able to make something more sustainable. But I'm going to beg the question, is more sustainable than beef the goal? Is more environmentally friendly than chicken the goal? Well, if we're 90% better than something that's really harmful, doesn't that actually mean that we're still doing 10% of the harm? The way I see it is until all the bars on this graph get to 0 or below, every action we take in eating is still going to cause our children and our grandchildren to suffer. Who here in the room has smelled wildfire smoke in the last year? I've smelled it every day for the last 2 weeks here. Who bought the wrong shoes for their dog and they're not interested in walking on 160-degree pavement with you? Who's acknowledged that we have accelerated goals from 2050 to 2030, a 70% forward aggressive position to finding our path to carbon neutrality? This is taking place in all of the intelligent first world economies around the nation. So if we're starting at the beginning and we look at this through the lens of plants, what we learn is that when we start with the whole food, everything we do to it adds emissions, right? So the whole food is our baseline for our carbon emissions. Therefore, if we can figure out how to let the whole foods speak for itself, and let me clarify, a whole food versus a non-whole food. How many of us love extra virgin olive oil? A lot of people consider it a great healthy food, but is it a whole food? Of course not. The olive that it came from was the whole food. The olive oil doesn't contain its fiber or 100% of the edible portions of that olive. So if we can let the food speak for itself as whole foods, we will be in a position to solve for this disruptive opportunity. Have you ever considered what a zero footprint food system might look like? Take this little walk with me. Perhaps close your eyes. Imagine you're at home and you walk out your sliding glass door into your backyard and you walk up to this beautiful legume bush and you pull off a sugar snap pea and you pop it in your mouth and munch down on that delicious sweetness and the wonderful fiber. You throw the shell into your compost bin. Maybe you pick another one and you dry those seeds and you save those seeds and you grow them next year. Sound sustainable? Of course, it is sustainable. In fact, it's subsistence, the first form of sustainability. And what happened if we were a subsistence farmer and we failed to keep our food sustainable? We suffer. So, what is the alternative to this zero carbon footprint food system? Well, let's talk about our current food system. And that is a system that has a lot of processing involved. And let's talk about what we would do with that same pea. If we wanted to take that pea to market, well, first of all, we've got to grow a truckload of them because no one's going to process less than a truckload. And if we wanted to go to pea protein isolate, well, we're going to have to send that to a seed crush facility. And at that emissions occur, right? And when we get to the crush facility to do the crush, we have to utilize things like hazardous chemicals, potentially hexane, or lots and lots of water. Then we've got pea protein, perhaps fiber and starch, maybe even oil rendered, and we now have to sell and distribute and package. So what we have is emissions to get it there, emissions to process it, emissions to move it forward. Emissions, emissions, emissions. The less processing we do, the less the footprint of our food. So, as you can see on this slide, the reality is that whole peas eaten at home actually have a negative carbon footprint. But if we go to the next level and want to process them to market, we're going to increase that footprint 12-fold. And if we want to turn it into a fractionated food, we're going to increase it 55-fold. So the reality becomes that we're coming across such a population that so many people, well, they no longer want to eat that guy. And if you want to eat something that's made to taste like that guy, well, you're going to see 12 times the footprint of eating a whole food. And if you believe in eating whole foods, and you believe that your food doesn't have to smell, look, or taste like an animal, you can see a 5,500% increase in the benefit of what you're eating to our environment. That's what I'm talking about. The more processing involved, the more costs. As you go from processor to processor, you have the expensive processing plus the profit to each process and processor. And the same for the transportation. So it's very clear that as we get food all the way to the final element, the retailer or the food service restaurant, at which point all those pennies, they either get doubled or quadrupled again as, well, everyone in this room sells these products to consumers. The good news is peas are cheap, and so are most produce and most vegetables. In fact, they're the most stable component economically in our food system, have been for a long time, and as you can see over the last 2 years in crazy economic conditions, they have held fast to be the most economically unchallenged portion of our food system. So if we agree on two things, the less we handle the food, the less it's touched by different parties, the lower the footprint and the lower the cost. At the same time, the closer we stay to the model of eating just that single pea, consuming and processing just that single pea, let's call it a micro batch, the closer we remain to a carbon neutral system. So could whole food plus micro batch processing yield a zero footprint food system? Well, I can tell you this. If we've figured out how to take an entire large animal from nose to toes, bleed, skin, bone, and grind that animal in 2 seconds, I promise you that with the right funding, with the right research, it's just a matter of a few years before all of us could be dining at big events like this and with every bite healing the planet. So I need to give you a little bit more on what micro-batch processing really is. So if we look at batch processing, we see that we have a set of time laid out for production, and it's equal in both systems. In the batch processing environment, we've got 4 truckloads ready to go into the batch in those 4 different colors. But what if they're all fresh food? That would be amazing. However, one of them didn't show up. Are they all going to go to waste? You see, in a mass process, things that work really well, powders because they mix so easily, refined oils because they lubricate and they create emulsions with powders, those kinds of products were great in mass production for so many different reasons. But it's really a limitation to the system. So if we talk about microbatching, the beautiful part of microbatching is that we focus specifically on each and every ingredient and how to extol the greatest quality benefits from that ingredient without destroying the whole food. So we ultimately will do as little processing and as little work as possible to get to the final result. What you can see here in a microbatch process is that our inputs are small and continuous, and so are our outputs, which means we carry less inventory on the front end and less finished goods in a freezer on the back end, again, minimizing the footprint of the process and system. So we've agreed that more sustainable does not equal sustainable, and that the goal is not more sustainable, but the goal is carbon neutral. Do no harm from the system. Let's dig a little deeper into our master equation. As we look towards profitability, what is the component of sustainability that's so critical? Well, it's critical that the consumers want sustainability, right? So what we're seeing is some of the larger chains in the nation, some of the most progressive chains in the nation, actually respecting the fact that their clients, consumers nationwide, are just as interested in counting the carbon on their meal as they are in counting their calories. And in knowing that, we've actually carbon footprinted all of our protein products as well. And as you can see here, they are so close to carbon neutral that with a bit more ingredient intelligence, a bit more processing innovation, and a greater direct connection to regenerative agriculture, we will find carbon neutrality with these products. In fact, the hemp and seed line that you see here is so low is already down to 108 grams in our theoretical model. We didn't just make up our numbers. We've actually had a study that was just completed, done by the Climate Sciences Department of Northern Arizona University, where they actually took the different processing techniques that I shared in my original slide on plant-based, and they compared the major different types of processing for their footprint as based on the leaders in the industry and the reports they've put out in the last 2 years. In addition to that, they built us the most beautiful calculator that allows me to go beyond the idea of just designing food for its taste, for its nutrition panel, for its cost, but also to be able to calculate its carbon and water footprint before we ever bring any ingredients in the door. These are the tools that are driving us further to carbon neutrality. What we can also see here is when we want to talk about nutrition, well, the benchmark in this space is protein. We're meat alternatives. So let's talk about carbon to protein ratio. And if we look at the leader in the industry, what we're seeing in heavily processed products is that we've got a 19-to-1 carbon to protein ratio. In the latest product we've created, which I just mentioned, our hemp and seed, we actually have about a 7-to-1 carbon to protein ratio, far less than half of what we're seeing through other processing methods, which tells us we're on the right track. So let's take a quick look at the desirability component. Desirability, well, to quantify it, to give it some sense, it really means demand. And with all the different factors that go into taking our personal preferences and turning them into a demand, well, we've all had to quantify demand for our businesses. And one of the ways we can see is to give you a very quick recent result. This is at the Yavapai Lodge in the Grand Canyon, and we've got the data from their POS systems to let us know how we're doing. And what we can see is that head-to-head with a heavily processed product versus a whole food product, there's really no comparison in the sales that they're doing. In fact, the last 80 days have been a 250% increase in anything we've ever seen before. Why? Coming out of COVID, they opened in April and they're booming in the national park. Well, we're the local player, so you do get a taste of place from us, right? But as the person who was on the front page of the Sunday food section of the Chicago Tribune back in 2007, when Webster's dictionary put the word locavore into the dictionary and the Chicago Tribune needed a locavore on the front page, I can tell you that today, local is more important than ever. But the question is it because it's local? Well, the truth is, local has a lot to do with how we source our food from a fresh perspective. Most importantly is, do we know what our food is? If we can also know where it came from, that's exciting. And to know who provided it and perhaps trust them, whether it be your farmer or your grocer, the concept revolves around whole food, and it is more present and more relevant in the minds of people that are eating plant-based, that are eating for nutrition, for health, and for longevity than it ever has been. So is this also true for the B2B community that we serve? Of course. Paul, he needs his profit. It's his fiduciary responsibility. Salima, I could talk to her all day about how to innovate on sustainability. And Alex, he needs affordable food. He's cutting weight, he's kicking butt, and he's got options that matter. And Denise, she's been serving frozen pucks for years to some of her most discerning clients with shame in her mind, and now is excited and smiling every time she gets a vegan order. Our stakeholders are satisfied across the board by whole food and a path to carbon neutrality. My vision is that local has a footprint on a national scale. And it's by taking what we've already done in a very remote and difficult location and bringing that to other agricultural highways throughout the United States that serve our major populations, and leveraging the wonderful whole foods grown in those climates, using microbatch processing to put them together and get them to the end client, be it the restaurant, the grocery store, or your front doorstep. So let me just leave you with a few questions. Have you considered the role that whole food plays on your menu? Have you considered lowering your menu's footprint? Have you considered doing it today?